Hi everyone, Crystal Sully here, and this is my introduction to Procreate, just covering some of the basics. This is going to be your general user interface here, where you have all the work that you have open. This is where you're going to create new canvases, import existing artwork. I do have a lot of my client work that's under NDA blocked out here. Can't share that just yet, but when you have a group of multiple pieces, that's going to be called a stack. And to make a stack, pretty easy, you just drag and drop something, kind of hover over there, and drop it in here. So that's super nice. Let's go ahead and discuss these three options here in the top right. So your select option is pretty simple. You can select multiple stacks and individual artwork if you need to delete a whole bunch of stuff, or if you need to group everything together, categorize them, that kind of thing. Import is pretty cool. You can access your device's file explorer. So I keep all my stuff on a hard drive that is accessed via network. So this way I don't have to just store every single thing I do locally on the iPad. I can just constantly tap into those drives and grab it. So got that one. Photo up there lets you access your device's sort of photo memory and pull that from Apple Photos. And then this plus symbol here is pretty important. This is where you basically create your new canvas. And I mentioned this up front because it took me a long time to figure this out. Procreate creates a time-lapse video of every single piece that you do for you, which I think is great. But it's not very clear about where you do that, so it's nice to go in here and you can control that in this area. If you go to time-lapse settings here, this is where you control what your time-lapse video looks like. So I had mine set to low quality for quite a long time, unfortunately, which is a bummer because I can't go back and redo the pieces, and you can't export at a higher quality. So once you set this for whatever painting you're creating right here, whatever canvas, that's what it's going to be stuck at. So make sure you go in, and even if you don't think you're going to really use it, I think it's always a good option just to have it set to good quality if you have the memory. So I set mine to studio quality so that I can bring these videos to my lovely patrons on Patreon. And you also have your color profile here, which I think is pretty important. I do a lot of art prints and playmat printing, and you usually have to have your files in CMYK for that, so you can control that here. And of course your dimensions, so width, height, centimeters, inches, pixel size, DPI. If you are making something for print, I always recommend having it at 300 DPI minimum. That way you're going to get a lot of nice detail when you get this printed out. And also, for standard frame sizes, whatever geographical location you're in, go ahead and look up what those standard frame sizes are if you're going to make a piece for art prints. It really helps us and our customers when we sell prints. They're only 11 by 17 or 11 by 14 or 8 by 10. That way they can go into any framing shop and get a pre-made frame and not have to spend a lot of money on custom framing if they don't want to. So that's kind of nice. Let's go ahead and take a look at this piece and get a little more in-depth about some of the tools in Procreate. So this piece here was a fan art I made for one of my favorite shows, Critical Role, Geladon, The Nightmare in Ivory. So I won't say any spoilers, but it's pretty cool. Gallery here is what's going to take you right back out here to your main stack and then, do your other paintings. This little wrench here is where you can control a few important elements, like add on the top left is going to be where you can insert files if you have an existing painting that you just want to touch up or bring with you, say you have to, travel somewhere. Because I use the iPad Pro everywhere I go. If I'm tired of sitting at my desk all day, I'll move out to the couch. I have a little lap desk I'll put in my lap while, my husband watches a movie or something, and that way I can kind of change up my environment a bit. And we travel to a lot of conventions, so I can actually work on the plane. I can work in the passenger seat in the car, usually with my lap desk. It's pretty versatile. So insert photo, add text, cut, copy canvas. There are shortcuts for this as well. You probably can't see it because it's just recording my screen, but if you take 3 fingers and drag it down, you'll get this option as well, which I think is really useful because then you don't have to go in here, go find it, and then hit cut. Canvas here is pretty important. I use the flip canvas horizontally option quite a bit. I think it really helps me just make sure that my main shape language and just color and values and everything is reading correctly, because I don't know about you, but when I work on a lot of art for hours and hours on end, sometimes my brain starts to get into this weird mode where I'm like not sure what I'm looking at anymore. Like you get so used to looking at the same thing. So flipping your canvas horizontally, and people think I'm crazy for this, but I love flipping it vertically as well. You can resize while you have this menu open, which is just pinching, you're pinching your fingers closer or further away. You can kind of see that. This helps me as well. It sounds weird, but it makes sure that my lighting is all uniform and nothing really looks out of place by flipping vertically. But just make sure you flip it back before you before you share it up. One thing to note that is really nice about Procreate is it's recording this whole time lapse right now. It will not record the zooming in and zooming out, and it will not record flipping horizontally. So whatever orientation you have your piece, whether it's facing left or facing right, make sure that that's where you want it to stay when you have your time-lapse video, because that's how it'll record. But it is nice because then you don't have your piece flipping left and right constantly in your time-lapse video. Canvas information here has stuff like, height, width, layers, color profile. The only thing is, in video settings here, you cannot adjust your video quality. See, you'll see I'm trying to click on it here. And you can't adjust it once your piece is already created. So that's why this one says video quality low, and I'm really sad about that because I would have loved to have a high quality process video for this piece. So just make sure when you create a new canvas, you definitely go in there, go into your time-lapse settings and select at least good quality, because you never know if you might want that video later. For me, I ended up making a Patreon, and now I'm just really grateful that I'm now setting the time-lapse quality to high so that my patrons get to actually see these details and it's not just like a blurry mess. So we also have crop and resize here as well, under this canvas option. And then this next one, share, this is pretty important. This is how you're going to share your piece to the rest of the world. For me, sometimes I work in different apps. I recently started using Art Studio Pro, so I will actually save these out as a PSD so that I retain my layers. And you can select that here, which is nice. There's JPEG, there's PNG, TIFF files, that type of thing, which is pretty nice. And then video here. Just always make sure you have that time-lapse recording option selected here, how it's blue, which means it's turned on. That's really nice, just so that you always have that video. And then export time-lapse video is how you save that. And from there you can export it to, either just the device itself, you can save it in your photos, or like me, I export it to whatever hard drive I have that client folder on. And you could just share it with the internet, which is great. Preferences here. You have like what interface you like. I like the dark interface personally. Here's the light one. My eyes are always strained from doing so much digital work that I think the dark one is really nice. You can control other things here like your pressure curve, which I think is really cool because some people like me, I'm very heavy-handed, so it's nice to be able to control exactly how that looks. Gesture controls as well. This is pretty important. Procreate does have I want to say like a handbook that they have on their site that you can look at as well that goes into how their gesture controls work, and learning those has made my process a lot easier for this app because you can quickly just tap 2 fingers on the screen to undo, drag 3 fingers down to copy, paste, etc. So we have those. So these are all your sub-menus here. Oh, and actually if you click help, you can access the Procreate handbook right there. So it'll pull that up in Chrome or whatever browser you have installed. This next one here I use quite a bit as well. This is the adjustments area. So you can adjust opacity, you can add blur, you can sharpen, you can add noise, you can play with liquify, clone stamp, kind of like Photoshop has. I use these bottom ones quite a bit. Hue, saturation, brightness, just to kind of show you what these do. Hue is great because if I decide this guy's pretty cool tone. If I decide, no, let's make it more like warm tone. You can see slowly creeping into that green territory is pretty gnarly looking. Actually, I really like that. Saturation is going to control basically how saturated your color is. So bring that all the way down, you're going to get something that's more black and white, or all the way up, and it's a little crazy. But it's nice to be able to control these manually. Brightness as well. You can kind of control these. It does take a subtle hand, I think, to avoid going overboard like this. And the best part about Procreate is if you don't like your changes, down here in the bottom right, this little arrow that points to the left is your undo button. And I think you can actually move this menu bar around whether you're left or right-handed. I just like having mine on the right. So this is a redo versus undo, so you can go back and forth and decide if you like those changes. Another one I use quite a bit is color balance here. Color balance basically lets you move it in individual tones, tone directions, if you will. So like this one, let's say we want to go maybe a little more yellow tone in the shadows. It'll kind of just lean in that way. It's different from hue because hue changes all of your values into like a solid, pink or yellow or blue. But this is kind of fun. You get to just control it individually, and I think it has a lot more control than the saturation and hue layers. So this way here, for example, let's say maybe, we want to go warmer tone with him. You can kind of control that manually and be really, really subtle about it. And then, again, if I'm just not really a fan, I can just undo those. Curves is another one I use a lot. If you select gamma, it'll select all of your colors and tones, and you can go ahead and adjust this top one here to control like your brightest brights, and then down here is kind of your darkest darks. So like I try to avoid, because I do a lot of printing with my work, I try to avoid having my shadows too dark. So I'll crank this up just a tiny little bit, and it is pretty touchy, so you can kind of see the difference if you go up too much, or this one too, if you make your highlights too bright, it just kind of looks washed out. So kind of about balance with those. That's basically the adjustment layer area in a nutshell. And then, let's see, this one here, selection. Okay, this is a pretty important feature for Procreate. This is the same thing in like Photoshop or Clip Studio, any other app that has a selection tool. This allows you to take one area, so here, let's say this fin on this white dragon, let's say we want to change that shape a little bit. If you select it here, you'll see this dotted line that kind of shows you inside of like where you've drawn. If you go ahead and hit this button on the right next to that S for selection, that's going to be the move tool. Now the move tool, if you have freeform or uniform selected, you can kind of just slide it around like this. But that's not really what I like to use. I love using the warp tool on the far right here. So if you use that, you can go ahead and just kind of play with it. Play with the shape, say like, maybe I want this to be way smaller and a little more sleek and maybe even more sharp, like a shark fin. You can kind of play with that way. You can also go into, I like using distort. The distort tool is really nice if you're trying to get your perspective spot on. So like you can kind of make it so that like this top part here kind of recedes back into space. You can like kind of lower this. You can kind of move that side to side. It lets you have some control, I think, with just the overall different planes. Uniform is pretty much what it sounds like. It's going to take whatever you have and just keep everything the same proportions. Freeform, if you turn off magnetics down here, magnetics keeps it the same. But if you turn that off, and sometimes it glitches, sometimes it'll have it off, even though it says it's on, you can kind of make it like if you want it to be shorter or maybe a little longer this way. So that's kind of the gist for the move tool here when you have a selection. And if you don't want to just select a little piece and you want to warp the entire piece, which I do quite a bit throughout my painting process, you can just hit the move tool and it'll just select whatever layer you currently have selected. So I have my color layer here currently selected in blue. Gonna hit the move tool, and I can go ahead and take this warp tool and maybe like make his face a little longer here. Maybe we make the neck a little lower. And however subtle you want to be is totally up to you. But I use that tool quite a bit. And that's going to be up here in the move tool, just this little arrow icon. Now, this is my favorite section. This is the brush library and the brush tool. I do want to make a tutorial that's all about brushes because, as you can see, I have a couple. Just a couple. I love buying new brushes and, supporting creators because most brushes you're going to find out there are creator made. I'd say my favorite set that I use right now is by my friend Randy Vargas. Does amazing, amazing artwork. And he made this brush set that, while there's only I want to say maybe 12, 15 brushes, I pretty much just use these when I'm painting. The others are really fun to play with because you have different textures and stuff, but if you're just needing to bust out a quick client painting, this set pretty much has everything you need. And I'll go ahead and put the link to that as well in this Patreon post. So let's select a fun brush. I think one of my favorites is this brush here. And let's select like a dark red. Okay. These two little sliders here on the right, top one is going to be your brush size. So you can let's see, move that way down. Get some nice small brush strokes if you're doing more line art or detail work. Or if you make that huge, you can sort of just block in large areas. And it is pressure sensitive. Everything on the iPad Pro is with the Apple Pencil, so I can just lightly press down and get just a little bit of that warm shadow, or press really hard and get a lot of coverage. Undo that. So that's what that top slider is. The bottom slider is going to be your opacity. So opacity is pretty important because since this is a dark red and the piece itself is more of a cool tone to go with the icy dragon lore, it's nice to lower the opacity pretty low so that you're basically doing a glaze. So if I want to get those purples in there, get some warm tones in, I can go ahead and do that, but it's like having a very, very thin watered down glaze if you do oil painting or acrylic painting. Then you can bump that way up again if you need to maybe get some crazy details in there and really push that red, which doesn't really fit this piece, but it serves its purpose, at least for the tutorial itself. The one next to it here is pretty fun. This is called the smudge tool, and I don't actually use this as much as I should because I honestly just haven't played with it, but making this tutorial, I had my notes going over what things I wanted to cover in this app, and I got to the smudge tool and I thought, I should probably play with that before I start talking about it. And I've gotten kind of hooked on it, I'm not gonna lie. It serves I want to say a palette knife. I used to do a lot of oil painting in college, and we used palette knives for everything, which sort of lets you drag around whatever oil paint you have already put on the canvas. This serves a similar purpose as well. So this is how I can get some of these soft edges up top, say this neck that isn't really the focal point. Can sort of blend that in, or if I do have a focal point area, I can shrink down the size and blend some of these values together without having to select new colors. Because while it is nice to understand color theory and make sure your colors all are pretty unified, or if you're like me and you like doing complementary color schemes, just to make sure that those are reading well, I think this is really nice to be able to pull whatever tones you already have laid down. But just make sure you have the layer selected that has those colors, because if you do a new layer, let's see, layer 3, here's how you rename that, by the way. If you tap on the layer name, you'll have a little submenu here. Rename that, let's just call that layer LOL because I'm very mature. I can go ahead and let's add some of that red. Now if I'm selected on this red, that's all that's on this layer, not the base one, if I use the smudge tool, you'll notice it's not really doing anything. It's not really pulling anything because it's only pulling the value that's on that layer. But if I go into this red here, then you can see it's pulling that all over the place, which is fun. So one of the apps I really like using is a program called Corel Painter for the PC that I use. And I feel like this tool specifically replicates some of the the grainy water brush I love using in Corel Painter. It's where you can water this down, you can blend this in, you can just make it look a little more natural instead of just laying down really thick blobs of color. So that's going to be the smudge tool. And real quick, show you how these layers work since we're already in this menu. This little check mark box is going to be how you turn the layer on and off. And next to it, where you're going to see this N, is where you can control your opacity. Let me move this over a little bit so you can see it. So you can make it like 50% opacity. It looks kind of nice actually. There's just a little hint of red. It's not overbearing. If I bump that back up to max, which opacity basically means the thickness of the pigment or the layer. So 100% means it's all the way visible. But if I bring that down and it's only half visible, it actually looks pretty nice. That's how you select that here. And then there's also different layer modes that you're going to see listed. So like multiply layer is another one I use quite a bit. When I do line art and sketch phases and stuff in Procreate, I always set them to multiply because anything underneath it, isn't going to get as dark as that multiply layer. So let me show you what I mean here. Let me select one of my sketching brushes. This Derwent pencil brush is my favorite. Even though this is a dark red layer, actually, let's select a lighter tone. You'll notice that it still stays darker than the layer underneath it. So if I take a really dark color in the layer underneath it, go back to a painting brush, and I start painting, that's a little too crazy. Multiply just helps that line art just stay a little better preserved so that you can always see it. Because I know sometimes if I start painting colors that are too dark, I will end up losing track of my sketch layer. So multiply layers are pretty nice. You also have all these other layers. You can lighten, screen, color dodge is really fun. I use that one for fire effects a lot. Soft light, hard light, exclusion, hue, saturation, and you can kind of see as I scroll through these, they all look pretty crazy. So definitely play with those and see what kind of layers you like. And you know, if you get a little intimidated by it, just stick with a normal layer too. That's totally fine. Then you can turn that on and off, which is pretty cool. I usually like to keep my background layer pretty much separate from whatever my piece is, if it's like this, where it's a silhouette against a background. So that's how I have those organized. And then we also have the eraser tool, which is pretty important to know how to use. I'm kind of boring. I just leave mine as a soft brush. But if you click that eraser tool here, you can actually select any of your existing brushes that you have and use that as your eraser shape. So here's just a soft brush. Let's select, oops, get on the background layer. That's another mistake I make all the time, and I'm sure every other digital artist does out there, but always make sure you have the right layer selected, because just now I had the background layer selected, and if I'm trying to erase, let's say, part of this like kind of skin underneath the jaw there with these spines, if I'm on the wrong layer, that's going to erase the background, and it's not going to erase the dragon. So select the right layer you want, and then based on how much pressure you apply, you can erase whatever you need to. So this is kind of nice for just controlling more what you have on your canvas. And you can always undo if you erase a little too much, which is really helpful. And on that note, one of the cool things you can do in Procreate that took me a while to figure out is the mask feature. So if I create a mask for Geladon here, and I select black in my color selection here, have my painting brush, you'll notice it starts to erase what's on that layer. So you might think, well, that's just like the eraser tool. What's the point of a mask then? Well, masks are great because say I have that masked out and I go around and I'm painting and I can't undo far back enough so that, you know, I'm stuck with this blob that's just erased. Well, if you select, rather than black, a solid white, you can go in and it will actually pull that pigment back out that I had erased prior. So that's really fun. It's nice if you don't want to commit to fully erasing like an important part of your painting, and I think that's pretty huge. I like to see the mask as masking tape, but it's just a little more eloquent because you can control exactly what brush shape you use for the mask. You know, if you have like a layer that has a certain type of detail or a color you're not really sure about, you can go back and forth with black or white here. You can remove parts, you can select white, and you can add them back. So that's really helpful, and you can toggle it on and off too. So if you decide you don't like the mask at all, you can just keep your original painting as it is. So it's just kind of a little insurance policy to make sure that, you know, if you decide you liked it the other way better, you're covered. And also on that note, you don't need a mask to have a selection. And selections I use for everything I do digitally. And to get that in Procreate, you click on the little icon, it'll pull up the submenu, and all you have to do is just hit select. And anything that is on that layer, it'll group into the selection here. But you'll notice it doesn't make a mask. It doesn't make any kind of extra layer. So let's say this LOL layer, actually let's make a new one. Let's call it LOL2. So let's say we have our new LOL2 layer and we want to add some more warm tones onto Geladon, but we don't really get anything in the background and we don't want to mess with a mask. So I'll have a huge brush. See how big this brush is? Huge brush selection. And I will go through, maybe add those darker tones, and you'll notice it's not getting the background. It's only affecting the layer that I have selected here. And then if you want to undo that, you just click the little highlighted blue S for selection up top. You just click it, and then you can paint on the background again. So kind of a nice little shortcut to select a specific area you want to work on, and honestly, it saves me a lot of time. But yeah, I think that about covers most of the things I wanted to go over for just sort of the basics of learning how to operate Procreate as a whole. Obviously, I mean, each tool has so many different like subsets, especially brushes. There's an entire brush creator on here that I think would be really fun to go into. So keep an eye out. I'd love to do some more of these tutorials about specifics, especially brushes, because I have a bit of a brush problem and it's fine. And yeah, if you have any questions at all about Procreate or my creative process or any of that, don't ever hesitate to reach out. Thanks everyone. We'll see you later.